Academy Award winner, writer, director, Adam McKey. How are you? I know. Actually, Adam, you had 2 standing ovations. When I first announced you, everybody got up, and then...
I wasn't there.
And you weren't there, and...
Cool. Yeah.
And then, I told them, everybody to sit down, and then... and then once again, here we are. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. What a beautiful theater. I love this theater. Wow.
Yes. Dolby Atmos, Dolby Vision.
Very nice.
So, pretty ambitious film and pretty amazing storytelling that you do. And my first question is that it was such a complex narrative, but you choose to center the film with this narrator, this completely unconventional narrator that becomes the emotional center of the film. Can you tell us the genesis of making him the emotional center of the film?
Yeah, it really came out of the fact that Cheney's heart is under attack from power throughout the whole movie. I did research and learned that Cheney, during the Ford years, was smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day and eating a dozen donuts. And I used to work at, SNL in New York, and we used to grind it pretty hard there. I think the most I ever got to was 2 packs. And the idea of 3 packs a day with a dozen donuts, it shows you a couple things. It shows he was really feeling that rush. He was loving it. And then as the years went on, his heart kept taking, taking body blows. It kept getting damaged, and he was sort of putting that out there for us and putting it out there for his power. And I realized at a certain point that this was in some ways America. And so the idea came about that the person who's going to ultimately give up the heart to fill that gap of power that he had sought so hard, it was going to be America. And I remember saying, it's got to be someone with a face like Jesse Plemons. And the great Francine Maisler, our casting director, said, well, I think you can get Jesse. And I was like, no way. And when Jesse did it, I realized his face was that face of America.
Correct, but he becomes the face of America, but he's also the entryway into this complex narrative. And that was intentional, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Personally, I like it when I watch movies and I don't know exactly why something's happening immediately. Like, why is Jesse the one taking us through this? So, we gave him the line, like, we're sort of related. We'll get to that later. I mean, and I was worried. I remember when I wrote that line, I was working with Hank Corwin, our editor, who
was here, actually.
Here. Hank, could you stand up, or you deserve applause?
Remarkable editing work.
Where is he?
There he is.
One of the great editors of all time. He did JFK, Tree of Life. He did Big Short with us, and more importantly, a true artist. And so he and I talked about that line, and I thought, God, are they going to get it if we tell them that? If we tell them we're kind of related, are they going to know that? And Hank was like, they won't know. And I was like, they might know. And so there was a whole discussion about that. But, that's always a game with storytelling that you're kind of playing. Like, how much do we know? How much do we not know? How much do we want to know? I mean, I don't like necessarily a movie that, like, in the first 10 minutes is so insecure that it's got to tell you every single thing that's going on. So, well, the audience didn't get this, so tell them right away. And what ended up happening with Jesse as he developed through the edit, or Kurt, as his character is called, is that he became this kind of, I think audiences figure out that he represents America clearly, especially when you see him at war. but you start wondering what that representation of America, how it's going to play into the story, and by the very end, I was happy with how it laid out.
Your storytelling, absolutely remarkable, jazz-like. You break the fourth wall. You time shift. You use dog footage. You use iambic pentameter. Can you tell us about that approach? And
yeah, well, I think what happened with our last movie with The Big Short was that
brilliant, The Big Short.
Thank you, and thank you. I think we realized, audiences are so sophisticated now. I mean, there's so many ways we're watching things. There's streaming, there's TV shows, there's movies, there's theater, there's even sometimes advertisements, and everything is so creative. And we took this kind of leap with The Big Short, and the audience had zero problem with it. And so with this movie, I just gave myself permission, and I didn't, my goal wasn't to do it, but whenever it would pop up, and a perfect example, as you mentioned, is the Shakespearean scene, where I was writing that scene, and I was like, my God, this is crazily Shakespearean. Like, it's him thinking about how can he get the throne without directly getting the throne, and yet his wife, who's been pushing for the throne, is kind of saying, like, it's okay, like, those days have passed. And I remember sitting in my office with my dog asleep in the chair and just saying, screw it, I'll write it in Shakespearean iambic pentameter. And my oldest daughter, Lily, who at the time was 16, she had done children's Shakespeare, and she came in and she's like, Dad, your meter is all over the place. This is embarrassing. And she had to sit there with me and go through the meter. I was like, yeah, but I can do 12 beats. She's like, no, you can't. You could stay within 9 or 11, but you can't go, but you want to be 12, you want to be 10, you can go to 9, 11. I was like, what about 15? And she's like, no, that's terrible. And so my 16, 17-year-old daughter helped me rewrite that whole sequence. And I know, Lily Rose McKey, and so that's kind of how we looked at it. The biggest one was the false ending. That was the one where
which happens halfway through the film.
Through the movie. Oh my God, nothing makes me happier than when I see people look at their watches and start to get up. And I'm like, they really thought I made a Dick Cheney early days movie? Like, oh, I guess it's just him up until Secretary of Defense. All right, let's go get lunch. But that was a case where, once again, out of the stillness of writing and just being in that room for a couple days, it just kept hitting me like he should have stopped here. Like, he had everything. He actually was quite a good Secretary of Defense, everyone will tell you. And he embraced his daughter, and he was wealthy, and Lynne was writing books, and that damn phone call from W. Bush, which really came from his dad recommending him. And then there's very few people on planet Earth smart enough to know what that call means. And Dick Cheney is one of those people. He knew right away, this isn't just a VP job. This is an extremely green president, and there's a lot of room here. And I just kept circling that moment. There was a silence around it. And finally, I was like, I'm going to roll credits. And I was also very spoiled because I have one of the great composers who didn't do that end music as a joke. He actually wrote beautiful end music. Nick Bertel, who obviously scored the whole movie, who's so brilliant. He's here today as well. Where is Nick? Is he here?
Oh. Nick.
Any other composer would have written like a joke end score, and instead Nick writes like legitimately beautiful end music where I'm like, I feel bad we're not ending the movie right here. Your music is so beautiful. So yeah, it all came out of the writing. It came out of a story that's about a guy who's so bureaucratic, who doesn't have any real signature speeches, never sought the spotlight, but yet altered American and world history in a way that few have. And how do you bring that to life? That was always the question.
Going back to the iambic pentameter and the Shakespearean aspect to the film, not only is that scene, but the whole arc of the film has a Shakespearean feel to it. You have Lady Macbeth. You have even a King Lear moment at the end where Cheney betrays his daughters, one of his daughters. Was that your exploration of power? Can you elaborate about the writing of it?
Yeah, it became something that early on I started, you never say, hey, I'm going to do a movie about Dick Cheney. You just start reading. And from the first couple books I read, I was like, oh my God, this is a tale of American power. And it kind of fit with the MO of where our culture is now, where, we're told the person in the spotlight has the power, but more and more I think we're learning that's not the case. The Big Short kind of did that as well. And the more I looked into Dick Cheney, the more I discovered Lynne Cheney. And the more I discovered Lynne Cheney, I realized in a weird way, a lot of the story is hers. I mean, if you read, Sid Field, McKey kind of screenwriting tips, they'll always tell you inciting incident in the first act. Well, it's not Dick Cheney's inciting incident, it's Lynne Cheney's. And in a way, they're one and the same. And, Shakespeare obviously loved to do that. He loved to have two characters that were really one and the same, Iago, Othello, and Lady Macbeth. So it made perfect sense. And the more I kept writing these two characters, I realized it was almost impossible to tell the difference between the two of them.
Both Adams and Bell's characters, Cheney and Lynne, we understand them from the inside out. They're humanized. Is that something that was necessary in the storytelling for you we see their family side. We understand how they tick, etc. Can you tell us about that?
It's a great question. It's one of the central drives of the movie was that I don't believe that people are born heroes or villains. I believe life is very complicated, and I believe we all bounce off each other in ways that we can't even imagine. And from everything we read about Dick and Lynne when they were young, I think most of us would have liked them. I think Lynne came from a really hard household. I think she was brilliantly smart. I think she lived in an era where there weren't a lot of opportunities for women. Maybe if she had lived in a different state, she might have even have been an early feminist. I think Dick is a no BS real guy who loved to fly fish, had a good sense of humor. And I think they both walk through this door of ambition for each other. I think they really, really love each other. And I think they walk through that door of ambition for their family, like a lot of Americans did at that point. And then I think something changed. I think that ambition became something a little bit darker. I think it stopped connecting to the good of the community, the good of the nation, and it became just a goal unto itself. There's a song by the singer-songwriter Sufjan Stevens that's about John Wayne Gacy, the serial killer. And it's, to me, one of the most beautiful songs ever written because you're talking about a guy who killed dozens and dozens of innocent young boys. And at the same time, the song is able to honor the deaths of these boys while show the pain of the killer, and not to compare Dick Cheney to John Wayne Gacy. I'm not doing that. But what I loved about the piece was that you were able to see someone as a human, not just as a monster. You were able to see the motivations. And I think unless we do that, we're going to run into the same walls over and over again, which are just labels and villains and heroes and right and left. And I think we have to get to, looking at people based on their actions, their choices, their motivations, and as elaborate human beings, not as, political party colors, red or blue. So that was really our goal with this movie. I have friends who are on the left who saw this movie and couldn't believe I humanized Cheney as much as I did. And I was like, well, there's no other road to go. And so yeah, that was definitely very intentional. There was a lot of work put into that. Hank and I talked about that a ton in the edit. And that's how the family became kind of the center of it. We kept looking at The Godfather 2, or I did anyway. That was a movie I kept looking at, where you have sociopathy on one side, but you have love of family on the other side. And that became a good rubric for us at some point.
Yeah, the dichotomy that you set up in the film with politics, but at the same time, you always bring it back to family. It's a really fascinating dichotomy that.
Yeah, I mean, it's what is. It feels like power always happens in the name of something, right? You never just see naked power free flowing around the world. It's always attached to something. It's attached to family. It's attached to some concept like freedom. It's attached to order. It's attached to vengeance. And in this case, it was very clear that he really loved his family. I mean, Dick Cheney would do the shopping for the family. He would do all the cooking. Lynne did not cook. That's where that scene from the mac and cheese came from. I mean, this was a devoted father who loved his daughters. And that's why when I read what happened with Liz, it was so heartbreaking to me. It just felt like, why would this guy from 20 years before do this thing now? And I think the only answer is just the wages of power.
And speaking of dichotomies, the way that your film shifts from incredible intimate moments to big scope, how was it balancing that for you?
Yeah, I think we talked, Hank, Nick, and I talked about how there's this disconnect that's happened with our government in the last 30 years.
Please turn that cell phone off. Sorry about that.
I say turn it up. And I want to hear that phone conversation. Let's get into that. No, I'm kidding. We talked about the idea that there's this distance that's been created between the people and the government and it's no accident. There's a lot of very powerful forces that want us to be cynical about our government, to not care about it. But the truth is, these decisions in boring hallways, boring offices, lame memos, long rambling speeches, we tried to show how those lead to villages being bombed in Cambodia. They lead to destruction around the world. They can also lead to good things. And we sometimes, I think, and myself included, I tend to forget the connection between this idea of representative democracy, this idea of government. People call it politics. I think it's a gross word to call it. I mean, we're talking about the throne. And we're talking about like a government that we have that supposedly the people occupy the throne. And it just feels like for a lot of us, we've been told that's boring, that's bureaucracy, that's who cares. So a lot of the movie, there was definitely attempts to show the connection between that and the massive effects that can resonate out of these decisions in boring hallways and offices.
Yeah, correct, which is actually one of the things that I was like horrified watching your film, is that I thought that as a citizen, all I needed to do is vote. And you point out that there are all these rules or laws that are being revised and us citizens are not aware of.
Yeah, they get tricky-dicky with the way it looks. There's no question. I mean, really, to me, the key moment in the movie that's not about the character portrait, which to me is the center of the movie, is Dick and Lynne Cheney. But there's a macro moment in the late 70s where big money comes to Washington, D.C., and that changed everything. Because in the early 70s, there were a few thousand registered lobbyists in Washington, D.C., and man, oh man, by the time the 80s were done, there were hundreds of thousands, registered and unregistered influence peddlers. And really, that's what changed it. I mean, this is a case where something incredibly complex could be solved really quickly, like turn off the money, and it would all change. Like, just turn it off. Yeah. Go to only individual donations, limit access to lobbyists, and you would see our entire government change overnight.
One of the things that I'm literally, I'm speechless watching your film, and I'm so honored you being here, is that, you know, good art is able to start a conversation. And I've always believed that. And Shakespeare did that, and other great filmmakers and artists, and you with this film, with good art. I mean, this film starts a conversation, and also starts us thinking the way we see things.
And that was our dream with the movie, was that, once again, I think we're all sick of this right butting up against left kind of stuff. And we were just hoping, Hank, Nick, and I, when we were talking about the movie, my favorite movies that I've ever seen in my entire life are the ones where I stand outside the theater for a half an hour afterwards and have conversations with my friends or my wife or whoever I'm with. And that was the goal. The goal was to look beyond all this kind of junk that we're all getting bombarded with, and just look at the story of a man, look at the story of a country, look at the story of his wife, you know. Yeah, that I would love to see that. I would love to see people outside theaters having conversations where they're not screaming at each other.
This is quite an ambitious film. FYI to everybody in the audience, you shot everything in Los Angeles. You span years, and also we go to Saudi Arabia. We're going to, Midwest. We're traveling all over the world, and within so many years, but it was all shot in Los Angeles. How challenging or fun was it to do all of that?
It was great. I mean, you know, you have the best people. You have Patrice Vermette, our production designer, who's done such amazing stuff. He did Arrival, Prisoners, all these amazing movies. You have Greg Fraser, our DP, is just, jaw-dropping. I mean, he's the one who came up with the idea of bringing in the Super 8 and the 16 mil, and that whole collage of kind of looks, and that helped us a lot with what you're talking about. But also, you know,
while still keeping a 35 millimeter look to it.
As the base, always 35 was the base. Yes. But little accents with the old original TV cameras, and there's nothing I love more than that rich 35. So we would always go back to that. But yeah, the whole idea was to do it here, to be crafty about it. And when you have really good people that can pull that off, you can give that sense of you're going all around the world. And they just did an amazing job with it, no question.
And you span 5 White Houses. I'm in awe because the fact that you must have had so many multiple set changes, and you're traveling through time so quickly.
Oh, it was crazy. And the makeup is changing. You're 6 decades. The big thing that killed us with the White House, and you would never think of it, are the rugs, the damn rugs. And we talked to Patrice and Jan, and they'd be like, there's a whole new rug here. We have to do another rug. So it was rugs, all these conversations about rugs. And then Fraser and Patrice are having conversations about the texture of the paint. So there are like 100 different paints on a wall being filmed. And I'm like, what's going on right now? And they're like, they're doing paint tests. And that was another big one too. So yeah, it was... And God, the makeup, I mean, what the actors did, Christian Bale, Amy Adams, Sam Rockwell, Steve Carell, on and on, Tyler Perry. I mean, how they were able to adapt to the changes in the decades on a dime. It was amazing. I would check in with them, and I'd be like, do you know where you are right now? And they were like, I got it, you know.
Yeah, for example, I mean, Bell goes from 21 to 63 to 71 back to 40s. How did you guys modulate that?
It's crazy. I mean, it's just, obviously in the schedule with the makeup, you have to deal with that. And then basically what you do, this is a little tricky secret I came up with, is hire the best actor on the planet, Christian Bale.
Which you did.
And then hire the best actress on the planet, Amy Adams. And then it gets you there. Yeah.
The best supporting actors around.
Sam Rockwell and everyone. I mean, they were just
Steve
incredible,
Carell.
man. Carell was amazing. I mean, you see Carell in the end, he's almost 80 years old. You see in the beginning, he's this cocky ex-pilot. Like, they're just good, man. They don't get thrown by that stuff.
Yeah, I love the Rumsfeld dynamic that he starts mentoring Dick Cheney, but then he becomes subordinate. That's such an incredible arc of the story.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. You really look at why did Cheney succeed where others, had some success, and it's Lynne Cheney really gave us the answer very nakedly and clearly. She said, if you want to understand my husband, know one thing, he's a fly fisherman. And when you really look at all his skills, his patience, his ability to stand in the bend of a river for 4 hours without moving, tracking the light, tracking the currents, looking under the rocks at what kind of bugs they're eating. They're like his detail. And then we were able to read a bunch of his handwritten notes, and they read that detailed. He just had this, he understood the power of silence in a town, Washington, D.C., that doesn't always get that.
You do something that I adore, and it's like subliminal storytelling. And like the scene in the restaurant where we see this Nicolas Poussin's paintings that at first glance, they seem inoffensive. And then all of a sudden we realize that the paintings are all about rape and mutilation, et cetera, et cetera. Can you, and then, little details like, in the Shakespeare scene, we see that Dick Cheney's reading about fly fishing, and Amy Adams is reading about how to become a writer. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about those details in the storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, we try and layer those into every scene we're doing in the production design. There's always I always want little treats to be there. But the big trick with that really is our editor, Hank Corwin, who's able to quickly put a toe into a flash of a crazy wolf licking a blade in the middle of a scene. I think that's the one you're talking about. And then somehow this maniac is able to show us that and then get back to the scene, and I don't lose a beat. He's able to keep the narrative. That was one of the big challenges with this movie. It had a very traditional kind of feeling to it. We talked about movies like Giant. We talked about, obviously, you got to look at Citizen Kane. You got to look at Little Big Man. But at the same time, we wanted that impressionistic kind of lifeblood to it. And Hank really did an amazing job of balancing between the two, this traditional style of editing, and then occasionally it would go into Ornette Coleman jazz. It was very, very cool.
But you're being very generous to all your collaborators. You trust the viewer to go beyond the bounds of traditional storytelling. Is that something that you're conscious, the fact that I'm going to trust we're going beyond the traditional forms of storytelling,
for
but
sure.
We're going to trust them to go along with us.
Yeah. I think we're at this strange time right now where we're at a precipice. I think clearly we all know things are changing, regardless of your beliefs or your views. The world is very much in massive flux. And comedy doesn't quite know what it is, and drama is trying to figure out what it is, and government. It's not just the United States. There's countries around the world that are in these crises. And everything seems to be up for grabs. And I think with these movies recently, we just felt like, let's jump into the void a little bit. Let's see what's going on in here, and let's not do the standard kind of genre stuff, which, God bless standard genre stuff. I love it. But I think we felt like, what is this? We did a TV show, too, before this movie called Succession. And that was a show. That was weak applause. That's hurtful.
Yeah, it's only like 3%. And it's like, come on.
No, I'm kidding. But
I'm not.
but that was another show that had like this kind of darkness to it, where they were unlikable characters, but there was a sense of comedy, and it was about dynastic wealth, and it was kind of about what's going on now. And I think our creative team on Vice, we just felt like you can't just, nowadays, it feels like to just slot stuff into genre. You're missing something very special and very mysterious that's going on in the world right now. And we just wanted to make room for that in our movie. And we don't always know if it's the correct answer or the right way, but we just feel like you have to acknowledge it, that these are unparalleled times that we're living in right now.
And we're dealing with very serious subjects and a lot of poignance and emotion, but you never give up the fact that we need to entertain. There's comedy. Is that something that you're conscious the whole time while you're making the film?
I just find it, and I'm sure a lot of people would agree, I find it exciting, energizing, sometimes funny to learn things, to get turned on to things, to see the world a different way. I think that's when when we're being filled up, those moments. And so to me, when we're making this movie, when I'm with Hank in an edit room for 12, 14 hours a day for months and months, or working with Nick Bertel in the score, we're excited. We're excited because we know we're doing something different. We know we're kind of going into a bit of an unknown area, and that just has an energy to it that's infectious for us. And we're not believers that important work has to be, low energy or have just a single cello scoring it, although God bless all the movies that have been scored by single cellos. It's exciting for us. It's exciting for us to live in these strange times that we're living in, and to be lucky and blessed and fortunate enough to get to do what we do. And we're really excited through the whole process. So I think that does show up in the movies.
I want to single out your work with your costume designer, that so much has been told about the characters through the costumes. I want to point out that when we first see that Cheney, he's wearing all these earthy colors, and then as the movie progresses, it goes into darker tones, and then the same thing with Amy Adams. Her character becomes more button-up and blouses and bows. Can you tell us about?
Well, Susan Matheson's someone I've worked with for a long time. She actually, I think the first film I did with her was Talladega Nights, and she hand sewed. She hand sewed these NASCAR race outfits, and I was like, "Who are you, and where did you come from?" And so she's very funny. She bops around from drama to comedy. She did The Town with Ben Affleck. She's done all these really cool things. And she's amazing, man. There's no one like her. And she had one of the toughest jobs on this movie, because you're right. There's a transformation from the middle of America, the kind of earthy, splendor in the grass, giant kind of center of America, to this colder, darker power that sort of gripped the Cheneys. And we didn't want it to be so radical and so jarring, like it was some cartoonish choice. It had to be very subtle. Susan was just amazing at it. And she's also incredible, too. She'll just hand make a lot of her stuff, too. She'll be like, "I can't find it, so I'm hand making it." I'll be like, "Well, how do you have the money to do that?" She's like, "I'm just doing it." And she's hilarious. She's used to run a punk rock club over in Silver Lake 35 years ago. She's South African. She's hilarious. And every time you meet with her, she's got platters with food on it. "Would you like some cheese, darling?" Platters. And I always joke that when you're in the room with Susan Matheson, life is 20% more fabulous. Incredible work she did on this movie.
I love the fact that the more we talk, it was just we're just gonna continue
I got a little tired.
No, it's all right. No. It's actually no. Don't. You're relaxing me. I was a little stressed out about talking to you.
Oh my God.
this is such a, you deal with such complex subject matter, but you actually simplify things to us. And it's also remarkable that everything about the stories telling us about how all of that happened then shape where we are today. You know, is that something that attracted you to the story and motivated you to tell the story?
We knew there was a connection. I mean, obviously, when you're talking about sort of the arc of American history, you know it's going to connect. But we were shocked how much of the movie kept coming into play as we were filming it, writing it, editing it. I mean, it was just crazy that we were in the edit room, and Hank remembers this, where Dick Durbin is grilling Brett Kavanaugh about unitary executive theory while we're cutting the unitary executive scene. And this is a scene we thought, like, this is too obscure. Maybe we shouldn't have this in the movie. And then it's becoming the center of this entire national event. And once again, regardless of your feelings about it, it just was amazing to see it become so pointed and so, you know, present. And we had it happen over and over again. We were filming the scene about the death tax. And while that was being filmed, there was a bill in Congress that was basically eliminating the estate tax. So I had like 6 crew members come up and go, look, they're going to raise it to 10 million, then it goes away. And like, so all these things, these like little details just kept coming into play as we were doing it. And yeah, it was Dee Dee Gardner, our producer, described it as just eerie at a certain point.
It's eerie, and the fact that, you know, in your film you deal with the fact that advertising, manipulation, and misinformation, this is what we're living in right now.
Yeah, I mean, that was another thing I was very proud. I don't know if there's ever a movie that's had focus groups in it before, but I love that we got focus groups, because I don't think most Americans are aware of the fact that pretty much every choice we're all making has been focus grouped. And when I read that the choices about the war were focus grouped, I was like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, I'm sure every piece of clothing I'm wearing right now has been focus grouped. I'm sure the car I have at home has been focus grouped. But the idea that war policy would be focus grouped, I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. So, yeah, that level of how you can manipulate language, you can manipulate public belief, how effective it is, advertising. Once again, to the Republicans' credit, to their absolute credit, they figured it out before the Democrats. They got there. They figured out how to use it, and they changed the way America thought and spoke about government in our country. So if you're a Republican, you should love it, because, man, did they do it well. If you're a Democrat, you should be like, hey, guys, wake up, you know. So, yeah, it's an amazing story.
Well, thank you for entertaining us. Thank you for making us think. Thank you for being here.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone, for sticking around.